Riegger, and oh, you didn't do it. No, what was
Good.
that face?
I hadn't hit it. I'm sorry. He'll edit this out. He'll edit this out. It's fine.
It's fine. Okay. Hi, I'm Maren Riegger, and I'm pursuing a master's in public health in epidemiology because I'd like to learn more about how diseases impact populations over time.
Hi, my name is Britton. I'm pursuing a Master's of Public Health as part of my doctorate in veterinary medicine degree. I'm just finished my first year, and I'm pursuing this to broaden my horizons and hopefully do something with infectious disease epidemiology upon graduation.
I am Megan Graham. I am a part-time MPH student in the public health education concentration, finishing up what is technically the first semester of the program. I would ultimately like to work with family health nutrition programming in my career.
Very cool. So the first question was to discuss the common thread between all of the various readings we've done throughout the semester. From my vantage point studying epidemiology, I feel like the importance of becoming fluent in not only the analytical side, but the descriptive side of epidemiology is really critical because we have to understand and communicate effectively between different disciplines and cooperate. Epidemiology is not an isolated field, it's interwoven with a lot of other fields. And if we want to actually be able to further public health in a successful way, we have to be able to communicate effectively.
Yeah. So it's kind of an interesting thing where I looked at the readings that we were available this semester as a closed group. Well, I feel like that applies to more of like an open like source to all reading kind of things. So I was looking at more in terms of how we were given readings based on how we would want to apply epidemiological methods and how we would do questionnaires and just really technical stuff on how we would actually apply certain things. And then, so we had about half those, and then we had half the articles were presenting solutions or studies for medical, economic, behavioral, and cultural problems. And we had a large variety of different material to draw from.
Yes, definitely. And I am personally newer to the field of epidemiology, so a lot of this material was very eye-opening to me, and how epidemiology plays such a large part in public health in ways that aren't always easy to see. So when you read statistics about the effects of disease or risk factors, it's easy to gloss over how those statistics were obtained and just accept what you're reading as true, as fact. So this course has really changed the way that I view research that I do outside of class, and in terms of the presentation of the data, their overall implications, and it was very practical to current events with the COVID pandemic. I was able to draw a lot of parallels in what I was reading in the course material and what was actually happening in real life and on the news.
So the second question was about maybe having an experience that conflicted with something that we read or studied during the semester. And I know personally, I found that there were some specific retrospective cohort studies that we read about that made conclusions around when mammography is most appropriate for women to prevent breast cancer as a screening method. And I personally have endured breast cancer. I was diagnosed when I was 35. And I know that the type and the grade of cancer and tumor that I had, if I had waited till I was 50, I probably wouldn't be here anymore. So I think that sometimes the anecdotal information that we have from our own personal experience can actually help us when we're pursuing epidemiology and when we're looking at data like this, because it can help us widen our lens maybe and expand what we're looking at and consider other groups or biases that we're, accidentally putting into things. If that makes sense.
And
yeah. Go on.
Sorry, Maren, I just wanted to ask: have you, considering you were diagnosed at a relatively younger age, have you talked with your doctor or any other doctors about what they think about earlier screenings, or when screenings are recommended for women right now?
Yeah, I mean, generally the pushback that I get, I actually go to Sloan Kettering in New York, and the pushback that I get is that it's all about the insurance companies and how they're pushing to pay less. So that's kind of another whole mess we don't want to get into today. But generally speaking, they feel like it has to be a very individual decision, and that a lot should be based on genetics. But mine wasn't a genetically driven cancer.
Interesting.
That's where the whole changing behavior comes in, where you have to change individuals' behavior, and the whole 7 tiers of social ecological model comes in, for sure.
Absolutely.
Megan, do you have anything that conflicted with what you read?
Not necessarily. Again, because I am newer to the field, but I think I mentioned before, I'm more open to questioning concepts that have been accepted as true. Just that's how it's been done doesn't really cut it anymore. I feel more comfortable with forming alternative hypotheses, even though I might not be the one researching them, but just broadening my curiosity. And what I am looking at in my career, the topic that I'm looking at is weight normative approaches in healthcare. And that's been something that I've been questioning just upon research and discussions with nutritionists. And so I feel a little more equipped to challenge the status quo as far as research and scientific statistics go.
Well, with the readings we were given, it was hard to find any conflicting unless you have personal experience with what was in it, just because so many of them were studies or instructional material. They would have their experiment, they would define their data, and then they'd present their conclusion. And unless you had went out researching and found an alternate study to directly contradict it, or a personal experience, you don't have. I found it hard to
Yeah, I mean, Eric,
conflict
you
with the
don't need
reading.
to have. Sorry to interrupt you. You don't need to have a lot of. I like your point that unless you have some personal experience that directly, or you go out and look for something conflicting, it's really there's not a lot of conflict there. But the next question talks about things that are in agreement with your reading. So do you want to talk about maybe some things that you found that you agreed with as you went through them?
This actually, so I had a couple pretty good examples because we read that one cohort study on dogs with epilepsy, and I had a dog with epilepsy. So, and although again, being in agreement or conflict, I kind of struggled with those terms, but I could really relate to it. And it was very interesting because I have had Shetland sheepdogs, and Coda, the dog that died, had epilepsy. So, and it was cool because Shetland sheepdogs are 20% of Shetland sheepdogs have epilepsy, which I had no idea about, which is fascinating. So I don't know if I really would say I agree with it because it's what the study found, and especially because all of their data was taken from insurance. So that was another thing where, even though I agreed with the data, I found because I agreed with it, I was more likely to disbelieve it or believe that there was some sort of something wrong with the data that corresponded with my belief, because all of the data for the dogs came from insurance, pet insurance companies. But people that get pet insurance, that's a small part of the population of dogs. So it's not a representative sample of society. Or it might be, honestly, because if you get dogs from breeders, but
No, I like that. I mean, honestly, I feel like if you have a motivation behind your data gathering that could bias your data, then it's not purely objective. So the thing that I identified with for this question was that we sort of live in Blacksburg in this little bubble of prosperity, and there's even some diversity here. I mean, I lived in New York City for a decade, and I've lived in London, and I grew up in Chicago. So the prosperity here is great. The diversity, it could do better, but it's okay. But we're in this bubble in Appalachia, and I can see immediately how an ecological study examining health issues that are common here, if you looked at a broad geographical area, it would really have some confounding biases in sampling. Even if your motives were good and you wanted to be objective, so I guess my experience living here really solidified the point that you really have to carefully divide the areas into the immediate areas and then extrapolate data carefully so that you're not, confounding your own study. So the reflection on the general population of Appalachia, if you only took health data from Blacksburg or even the New River Valley, I feel like would be irrepresentative.
Yeah. It's kind of like how if you try to take data for Virginia, you have DC and then you have like the woods, like far rural areas, farmland.
And as someone who grew up in this area, you're both absolutely right. Growing up here, I've lived in Richmond, so I've kind of had a taste of both. But even within the New River Valley, Blacksburg is very different from where I live here in Dublin, as far as diversity or lack of, I should say, economic status, morbidity prevalence, just across the board. So that was a really interesting point that you brought up, Aaron. I appreciate that.
Yeah, we probably better move through because we're getting short on time. Sorry. The fourth question that we were asked to discuss was just like how we could use this information to solve a public health problem. And mine's really short. I really want to focus on Lyme disease when I wrap up my program. I think that engaging a retrospective cohort study to examine exposure and diagnosis by small geographical areas could be really valuable because we've been able to show and prove through many studies that the tick population is sort of migrating with climate change. And so if we can start nailing down where things are and where people are getting diagnosed with Lyme disease, it might really help us.
Yep.
Absolutely. In my career, I, like I had said before, want to focus on family nutrition programming, and I've been reading a lot about a concept called intuitive eating and a concept called health at every size. So what I would like to try and do is further the education of healthcare professionals as well as the community around these concepts. It's been so ingrained in us as a society to utilize the weight normative approach, which basically says your health is positively associated with your weight, which for outliers, for extreme outliers, that is absolutely true. Being extremely overweight or being extremely underweight, that certainly is a valid approach. But there have been ongoing studies for the past few decades around intuitive eating and learning to listen to your body for hunger and satiety cues. So that's just something that has really piqued an interest in me as someone who's battled weight her whole life, and I would like to break free of the constraints of the weight normative approach. So my part in public health, I want to really broaden the alternatives for folks out there who are trying to combat morbidities that are typically related to weight.
That's really interesting. I mean, I did read a study, not for this class, but for a previous one, about how small children are very good at regulating their own food intake. Yes. And like we basically unlearn that. Yes. So that would be a really interesting thing to explore.
Yes, that's absolutely correct.
Yep. Be interesting, just because if you do the self-regulating behavior, it'd be interesting to do a study if you did focused around addictive foods, like so sugar or even cheese, for instance. like just focusing if that maybe has a, well, it's probably behavior, right? Behavior probably just has the greatest impact in losing the self-regulation, right?
Yes,
So,
it does talk about, or the research that I found does talk about focus on eating behaviors, and you know, like Maren said, you know, how we have unlearned that from childhood. You know, my 4-year-old is a prime example. She will not eat if she's not hungry.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, that's just an instinct that she has. So I don't want to be a part of her unlearning that.
yeah. I guess to touch briefly, I keep bouncing in between things. When deciding what I want to study, I focused, so talk about antimicrobial resistance, doing a study which is kind of interesting because you can't really use cohort or case studies on it. It would just be a pure regional study is what I was thinking of. But then I was talking on a discussion board with someone about herpes virus and how guinea pigs are a great example for them. And like, that would be fascinating. I just need to make up my mind, but can definitely use everything I've learned in this class in terms of data collection or data analysis just to work on that, and especially with questionnaires, because honestly, I've never made a questionnaire. I have no idea. So that helps a lot to have those resources.
That's awesome. The next question was how we could use this information in our career, which, I mean, you kind of touched on, Eric, but, you know, if you want to talk a bit more about that, that's great.
Yeah, I basically covered what I wanted to say in terms of questionnaires and observational studies. Observational studies, I don't know if I'm ever going to get into. I can definitely see analyzing, but I don't think that's the kind of study I'd want to set up myself, which is kind of interesting.
You sound from what I've heard about, like, you want to be more hands-on with your study.
Yeah, and that would be a lot of like delegating, I guess.
That's cool. I think studying epidemiology moving forward, just for myself, I think there's a lot of value in becoming really familiar with like the CDC's, the 22 rules for scientific integrity that we touched on, and the STROBE statement for professional conduct and stuff like that. I think just really having a firm grasp of best practices in the things that you're talking about, which are like reporting methodology and study design, that can just help make sure that all the work you do is valid and that everything you're doing, that you have really untainted results. And I think that's something that I can take away from this class and really apply to whatever I do in my career.
Yeah, I don't see myself setting up studies, forming study designs, but I absolutely see the merit in understanding what I'm reading when I am interpreting data, and having that underlying knowledge of, okay, I see how this was gathered. I understand the rates, the ratios, and what they're trying to tell me in this study, or in this journal article. So I'm really appreciative for adding on to my knowledge base for interpreting data rather than necessarily gathering it myself.
Yeah.
No, I think that's really important. I mean, if you don't have that fluency to understand, then you have extra steps added between when you've gotten information given to you and when you can actually put it to good use, right? So developing some degree of fluency is probably pretty important in what you want to do.
And it relates to what we were talking about before, where it's like you need to take in the technical language and basically decipher it for yourself in order to teach or teach other people about it.
For sure. So the last question was, does the difference in how we use this information and how other people use this information cause conflicts in how public health is addressed? I mean, I immediately think that, yes, sometimes if public health professionals have different interpretations of these ideas than other scientific areas, that it kind of leaves an opportunity for bias and misunderstanding to go unacknowledged. And I think that when we're going through all the different steps in the process of designing a study and executing a study and then analyzing it and, you know, revising hypotheses and that kind of stuff, that everything kind of needs to be on the same page so that there's clear communication among different types of individuals.
Right. What I find is, the issue that I am trying to argue is something that goes against what has been ingrained for decades into our society, that weight normative, and how your health is directly related to your weight. So I'm essentially trying to expand body positivity from a social construct into a medical one. And I understand that this is not going to be an easy task. I will need to understand the language, going back to that and having the background of how to interpret data. So it's a fine line that I'll be walking between effective messaging and being scientifically sound when I'm talking to healthcare professionals, especially. But ultimately, I want to maintain the public health, the public's best interest, while staying true to the integrity of the research and the theory that I'm researching. So, obesity is a growing epidemic, and, what's been pushed up to this point hasn't necessarily been working. So I think it's time to try some alternatives. So I just have to stay true to that and to myself.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic, because it's definitely necessary the pandemic's probably been really hard for that, especially.
Yes.
So I took a kind of different approach than both of you did, where I was thinking of it more as, because we're all getting the same information, this class is trying to normalize the procedures that we're all going to use in the future. So we would all, hopefully, by all of us getting similar information, it would prevent conflict in the future. And it's actually a very similar class a couple years ago about team building, where it took a bunch of people from different majors and we worked together on research projects. And it was amazing how differently people can think across different disciplines. And that's cool, because I didn't even consider that when answering this question.
That's really cool. Yeah, I think the intersectionality of all of our different disciplines that we're independently studying, I think we're really illustrating that we have to gain fluency in some of these fundamental skills to be able to be successful, because we'll need to cooperate with each other and to bridge these gaps. I actually am reading this fascinating book right now called The Ghost Map. And it's an exploration of, it's a Jon Snow book. So just reading all of the color stuff was really, really great timing. But it's basically about how the sewer systems of all of London and the greater metropolitan area were designed and laid out based on his work. And so it's about that intersectionality of different fields and disciplines coming together to further public health. And so that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, thank you both for being so collaborative. I've enjoyed speaking with you around our case studies and this project itself. And best wishes and best luck to us all.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, guys.
Bye.